In this one, I'm going to show you 3 easy lighting setups you can use in your Blender environments. These are setups that are very simple to create and I use all the time in my work. So the first one is using spotlights for really dramatic lighting setups and a few applications for that. The second one is outdoor sunlight setups. And then the third one is usually for dark futuristic renders where you're using a lot of emissive and reflective surfaces. So let's just get started with the first one here. Okay, let's start with the first example here and just go over everything that's making this work here. Let's turn off all the lights and I'll just bring them in one by one. There actually is one thing here to mention first, which is the volume. This is just my standard setup of just a cube over the entire scene with a volume scatter material on it. Lower the density, turn up the anisotropy, and then display it as bounds. You can do that in here, display as bounds down here. Okay, so with that out of the way, the volume adds a lot of atmosphere and I think it's really nice to have in scenes like this that are dark and with dramatic lighting. I think it really adds a lot of depth and atmosphere, so I'd recommend doing that. Okay, if we look at the actual lighting here, there's a little bit more than just one spotlight going on, but it's based off of that. Let me just take everything out and I'll bring it in one by one. So the way I do this is I usually have one main spotlight, which is driving 80% or so of the lighting in the entire scene. If I just turn that on, that in this case is just this one. So notice the light radius is turned up. So that's just this here. That's not the spot size, not the cone of the light, but rather the light radius. And that is going to be what is affecting the hardness of the shadows. If you just pay attention here, lower that down to 0, it's going to be a just crisp line. Turning that up will just soften out all the shadows and just make everything a little bit nicer to look at. Okay, and then the actual beam shape, the spot size, that's pretty narrow here. I don't usually go that extreme with it where it's actually just a full-on really narrow spotlight, but in this case I did that, and there's some other supporting lights which are making this work a little bit better. So normally I'd probably widen that up a little bit. In this case I went pretty extreme with it and kept it like that. And the problem we have with this is if you look at the background and really the entire rest of the scene outside of this little circle, it's pretty much pitch black. And that's where the next light that I'll usually put in here comes in, which is an area light or a fill light to just elevate or bring up the darkest shadows of the scene a little bit. If you just look at what that's doing, you can see the background and a little bit of the foreground now. If I turn that off, it's pitch black. This just actually adds a little bit of detail to, or just rather reveals the detail that's already in the scene. And it's just an area light. It's just an area light right above everything, just shining down on everything. Now this isn't super bright because you don't want to wash out the entire scene like this. It's very minimal, like more minimal than necessary here, but you just want it enough so you can kind of see a little bit of still dark but stuff going on in the rest of the environment. And that works really well in combination with the main light. So there's just what the area light is doing alone, right? Just the area light. And then the spotlight is going to be the main driver of the actual lighting. The area light just kind of is there to fill in the gaps between it. And then there's also, I have this other supporting spotlight, which is just shining in the back. This one is something that I will add in scenes like this, where you just duplicate the main light and then just shine it somewhere else in the scene and reveal like a little spot of something else there. It's just kind of interesting to do that, and it's not necessary, but you can just have a little beam of light coming in other places or multiple other places if you want. And then the last one, which is kind of a different thing happening here, is this one. This one is a special one because I've actually done a few interesting things I don't usually do here. What it's doing though is actually just emphasizing the rim light kind of effect that's going on here and just adding a little bit more highlights to the main area. The way it's doing that is actually a couple things. One is it's low down, and normally you would actually see this in the render. I've actually gone in and turned off volume scatter. Otherwise you would just see this floating cone of light. So this one is actually, if you just uncheck this underneath in this, object properties, visibility, ray visibility, volume scatter down here, which is on by default, just turn it off. Any light you turn it off for will still light up the rest of the scene around it, but it won't interact with the volume scatter around it. So you won't get this cone of floating light here. That's handled by the main light, which has it on. So this one is interacting with the volume. We're getting a nice atmospheric ray coming down. And then this one that's just there to emphasize the highlights, that one is not interacting with the volume. The other interesting thing here that's happening in the shader editor, if you just click on any light, make sure you're in a newer-ish version of Blender, so just maybe update it if you don't see this, but you could just go to any light, hit use nodes in the shader editor, and that'll actually let you add nodes onto the light itself. So what we're doing here is actually just a light path node, or sorry, light fall off node rather. It actually lets you control the exact fall off distance of the light, and you can use a color ramp to keep one area just as bright as before, and then remove another area, like change the fall off distance basically, while not affecting the overall brightness. So if I just take a color ramp here, first of all, the strength comes in at 100, which is unusable, I find. I actually lower that down to like something really low, like 0.1. Let me I'll just have this in here. I'll turn off the other lights so you can actually just see this one, what it's doing. So I'll put a color ramp in here, and it's actually working, but it's going the wrong direction. You can just flip the color ramp around from left to right, and now it's actually doing it in the right way. We can take a map range, put that at the end of the chain, and just turn up the 2 max, and that'll increase the maximum value. And that lets you actually, if I'll just switch it to like ease or something, that lets you very precisely control if you want to brighten up a very specific area and just have like really strong highlights coming in there. You can do it like that. So that's a really interesting kind of cool trick you can do sometimes if you want to just have that going there. And you have to have it kind of interacting with the other light in the scene, which is going to be more realistic and make more sense. I'm going to match the color. The main light you can see is kind of blue, so I'll make this one a little blue as well. And those together working synergistically is going to be much better than just one on its own, like especially just trying to do this by itself is probably going to have a high chance of looking unrealistic. But if you mix it in with the other main lights that are doing actual lighting, then it can work pretty well. So altogether, that looks like that. Like I said though, normally in scenes like this, it's a lot more simple without this thing in here. It's just usually the main light driving the main spotlighting, and then the area light, which is just filling in background space and just lighting up the rest of the environment a little bit. Here's another example of that. So there's a little bit more going on here, but it's the same concept as before. We have one main light, which is just lighting up the main subject. So it's off to the side. You can see the camera is just down right there, looking that way, lighting coming from like the side top. And that's a little bit more of a standard position that I'll put it in. So that's the main light. And then there's other supporting spotlights, which are just kind of little tiny beams that are just placed next to it, pointing in the same direction, which are there filling in a little, like we're kind of simulating sunlight coming through the trees or something. And you can see just with all those, it's kind of just filling in a little bit of empty space, just filling, like lighting up bright patches of little areas. They're all kind of just working together to feel like one light source in the render because they're all coming from the same direction, similar brightness, similar color. And then we have the fill lights as well. So there's area lights, not this one, but actually I think the one above here. So that's just filling in the really dark shadows, just adding in this case, a bit of blue. So just, yeah, area light above everything, just big, bright, not too bright, but just kind of filling in shadows. So that works really well with spotlights. And then I think there's another one above a bit further in the background, but it's a little bit more complicated, but it's the same kind of thing. Spotlight to light up the main thing, area light to fill in the shadows, and then maybe some special lights, which are down here in this case, which are acting as like fake bounce lighting. So that's pretty much my standard setup is spotlight to light the main thing, extra spotlights if it needs it or not, area light to fill in the darkest shadows and just bring up the darkest areas a little bit, and then probably one or two specialized lights in specific places to just emphasize something that I want. And that in this case, it's just a couple of area lights pointing this way with probably the volume scatter turned off. Not even in this case. Okay, so that's fine. It looks crazy, but it's the same setup as before. And that's the way I'll do spotlighting for like really dramatic setups like this. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, here's the next example. All the plants, trees, and foliage from this one are from Sweeper's add-on Arborea, just in case you're wondering where that's from. I'm going to turn off the moss and stuff just to keep it running smooth, but that's on in the render. So the lighting here is actually pretty simple. It's just an HDRI and an image plane for the sky, and there's one other thing too. So the HDRI is right here. This is just a free HDRI from Polyhaven. I just use their add-on from here. So their add-on's paid. It just comes with HDRIs. I'm not affiliated or associated with them, but the way this works is you just drag and drop in one of these, and then you can that makes it very easy to try a bunch of them, and then you can just rotate these around until you find the right spot where the light is hitting the objects right. The way you do that is really dependent on the scene. The goal is to try and show the form of the thing you're trying to capture in the best way possible, and a lot of the time that means just getting it so that the shadows line up right so that it just looks good from that angle. In this case, since we have this like hexagon block hill thing that's like sloping towards the camera, it's all layered. I felt like having the light coming from in front of the camera coming this way just felt like it worked really well. That was also helping to separate this building really nicely from the background, and there's a clear separation of like dark lines and silhouettes, but also brightness around the edge, like kind of the light hitting the edge of that, which lets you really easily see that building clearly. So that's their goal, is like clarity of separation of objects from each other so you can tell what's what, and also revealing the form in a kind of a pleasant looking way. So that, I think that was working really well with this one. And again, this is highly dependent on the scene. There's one situation which you probably don't want to do, which I'd recommend avoiding, which is having the sun coming from behind the camera. That's the only scenario where you'll get no shadows, because the light will be just filling out all shadows and washing out the entire scene. As long as the sun is in front of or to the side of the camera, you're probably going to be good. And you just have to play around with the angle until you find what works best for the scene that you're in. So in this case, just you add an HDRI and just pick a few different HDRIs, try them out, and then rotate them around until you find an angle that seems right. This is what I mean by you don't want to have the sun coming from behind the camera. All of a sudden, those nice layered shadows that were here are just completely gone, and that's probably a situation which you want to avoid. So just rotate this around until you find a bunch of different angles here could actually work. Like something like this could totally work as well. It just depends on what you want to go for. The other thing happening here is a sky in the background. So a lot of the times what happens when you use an HDRI is you'll get the lighting to look good, but then the actual background contents of the HDRI you might not be that happy with at that specific angle. So what I'll usually do is not worry about the background of the HDRI, just worry about the direction of the light and how it looks in the scene. And then once I'm happy with that, I'll add an image plane in the background, which has just an image of a sky on it that I actually do like. If you just come here, you can see this is the image of a sky just from the free stock photo site Pexels. That is running into a few things, but the main one is just the emission color on this plane. So it's just emissive. The color is the color of this sky image. The important thing here though is with a background sky like this, you're gonna have to go into the object properties again, down to ray visibility, and turn off shadow this time. You can see if you have that on, and we're not using this is actually blocking the sun from the HDRI. It's casting a big shadow because it's a plane. So you want to just disable shadow, and now there's no shadow being cast from this plane at all. It's just there to make the background look a bit nicer. The last piece of this, which you might have noticed, is the sun flare right here. So the sun from the HDRI is in that exact spot. If I just move this, I think that's why I was running it into the alpha, just so that the background could come through a bit. Yeah, so you can see that the natural HDRI sun is actually lined up in that spot right there. So this is just a plane that's just set to white. It's actually doubled up, so I just duplicated it and then rotated one of them 45 degrees. So just a white emissive plane, and then just being controlled by just a sun flare. So you can find these online pretty easily. There's a bunch of free packs of these you can just find, or just make one in Photoshop or something. So lens flare, that just is running into the alpha of that plane, and that's creating a very simple but effective sun flare. This only works if you can actually see the sun in frame. If you can't, you should not add this because that's not how that works. But if you see the sun in the frame, this is actually a really nice addition to just throw on top of it, just for a nice sun flare. You could do this with nodes and in the compositing, but it's just easier to slap one on, I find. The nice thing about lighting an environment like this with just natural sunlight is that it is very easy, once you get the angle right, to get it to look realistic and just overall looking nice. The HDRI just takes care of it. It does the fill lighting for you because it has a blue background sky already, and that just works. That's how daylight just looks naturally, and when you just put an HDRI on, or a sky texture as well, which you can find in here. You just search sky texture. It's kind of like a customizable HDRI, which you can just put on and then move around yourself. That's another option. I use that sometimes too. This works as well for another option if you just don't want to use an HDRI for some reason. You can see that actually looks pretty nice. So sky texture in the world shader editor is another great option. But that or an HDRI, they always look natural and good if you get the angle right. Okay, so the next lighting setup that I'll typically use is this one right here, this works for not just like futuristic renders, but any kind of emissive surface with a dark environment around it and a lot of reflections and silhouettes. So let's just go over this. We have a unlit subject here and a lot of like just really dark shadows around here, but a lot of reflective surfaces in the middle. And then that's being lit by just a big giant neon sign that's glowing in the middle. This by itself probably doesn't look that good. It's kind of more reliant on everything around it that works with this. So that's reflective surfaces, volume, in this case, pretty thick volume. If we just look at this, density is at 0.005, but the anisotropy is up pretty high. The scene is also massive, so it's a little bit thicker than the number suggests. If we just turn off the volume, here's what that looks like without it. Pretty big difference in this case. I think volume is definitely helping it a ton here, just to add so much atmosphere. So you can have anything here. In this case, it's a big Japanese sign with like crazy emission going on. It can kind of be anything though, and I'll show you some examples of how I might set this up from scratch in a different environment. So here's how I might set this up, and all the ingredients coming together in the most essential form. So I'm going to start with the floor, just so we have something to work off of. Let's go to rendered view in this camera down here, which I actually don't have a camera, so let's add a camera, Alt-R, and then just rotate this way, bring it back, Control numpad 0 to bring it in here. Let's go to the world shader editor. I'll just drop this to very low for now. Usually I just go black, but just so you can see what's going on, we'll have it very low. Let's widen the camera out, just do something a little bit wider, 24 millimeters. Let's do a new material on the floor, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Let's just add a cube, or a plane rather. Move this up here. Let me just do a quick, I'll just actually scale this up vertically. Let's apply scale so the next thing works properly. I'm gonna go to edit mode, inset with I, and then just delete that interface. Let's just make this emissive just to demonstrate this. So we'll turn that up. Okay, we have a black line here. That's just because this is no thickness. I can just extrude that a little bit and that'll fix most of that. Let's push this back and just have that in here. So maybe we should do a wet kind of floor. Let's just take a noise texture and let's plug that into the roughness. Let's turn up the scale, detail, and noise roughness. Drop the color down to something closer to black. Let's take a color ramp on here and just crank this a little bit just so that it's a little bit more grungy looking. It's an extremely basic floor. Normally I'd have a normal map or something else in there or do this with an actual texture, but for this example, we'll just stick with that. Let's add volume next because that's going to be kind of an important part here as you saw in the previous example. So cube, display as bounds, new material on that cube. You just delete the principled and search for volume scatter. Plug that into the volume. Density at something kind of low. Let's just do 0.005 to start. Maybe actually a little higher. Let's do 0.01. We can crank the anisotropy up a little bit too. Since this is kind of a small scene, I might actually crank this higher than I normally would. So this is now very high, but just to demonstrate this, we'll bring it up a little bit. In the world settings, I can probably just drop this to 0. One thing that usually does work pretty well in these environments is adding the same kind of fill light as I did in the first couple of examples. So that's just an area light above everything. I'll usually make it a little bit cooler and then just keep it on something pretty low but still there, just to add a little bit more atmosphere than just one glowing thing and then the rest is pitch black. So something like that. This, we can make it a bit blue or something else. And then in the compositor, if you come to the header up here and just turn on the compositor to either camera or always, you can use a glare node. So I'll just actually search for, there's a bloom preset in the glare node. Let's just drop that on here. This is not affecting the volume. It's just bright lights will just get a glow around them in the compositor. I'm gonna turn the strength down a little bit, but it'll still be nice to have in here. And then we need some sort of silhouette or something going on. So we can do that with some pillars. I'll just bring in a little cube and just model a little hallway thing here. I'll just put one of those there. another one over here. Let's actually just put the same material on this first. So select this one, shift select the ground, which has that shiny material. Control L to link materials. So it'll link the ground to this one. Apply scale, and then we'll just, I think the noise is going to be stretched out. Let's just fix that by going to the noise texture on either one. Control T, and then let's switch it to object coordinates just so it's not ungenerated. It's going to mess up the scale of this. I have to apply scale on both of these. And then we just have to adjust this back to like 1 or 0.5 or something like that. Okay, so that's working now. We could maybe add a little bit of detail in here if we want by just doing like, I don't know, a couple cuts. I'll just extrude and then scale those in a little bit just for at least having something. Maybe let's throw a bevel modifier on that. Turn that down just a little bit. We can duplicate that just so now that there's something else going on here. And then maybe we can just throw in another example of silhouetting something. So we'll just drop in a person. You can get these from, this one's actually from the Cyber Environments course, but you can find these on CG Trader and sites like that. Put a guy in here, and that's a pretty typical setup with just the core ingredients that go into making this lighting setup look good. It's not so much a focus on the actual lights as it is the dark shadows and reflections that you get. So we're adding walls that are reflective and a floor that's reflective, and all of that is helping to just bounce light around and make it look interesting. The actual emission surface itself is probably kind of important too. If you can put more emphasis on making this look interesting, that's going to make the entire render look better overall. There's a bunch of ways to do that. One of them is just add more detail by doing this. Another way is going to the shader editor and using some sort of input on the alpha. I like to just drop images in here sometimes. You can kind of put anything in here. So for example, if I just take this random image of a McDonald's menu, I don't know why I have that, but let's just put it in here and run it into the alpha. Let's take a color ramp, put it on, crunch this pretty hard, and just find a good spot for this. I'm going to apply scale. I'm going to hit yes, and I'll link all these back together in a second. Edit mode, and let's just unwrap it with a cube projection. Move it to one of the burgers or something. And then let's just crunch this a little bit harder. Now you can see we're getting some detail on there at least, so it's not just like a flat white thing. All these I can just link object data back to this one. Maybe we can find a more interesting spot on here to fit this onto. So let's put that there, maybe rotate it 90 degrees this way, and just figure out like some place to put this. Probably could have picked a better image to put on here, but that's at least something. So that's kind of interesting. And now we have something going on there. So I don't know. There's a bunch of ways to make that more interesting, and that's kind of up to you to figure out. But the main thing is reflections, volume, silhouette, interesting emissive surface, and then just fill in the rest of the environment with other props. I like using Polyhaven, so you can just start bringing in props. Let me just do some free ones from Polyhaven. So models, you could just, there's unlimited places to find 3D models, and just throwing them in here is going to be a good way to just make it feel kind of like more interesting. So we could just put some random boxes, or any random object in here is going to probably kind of look a little bit interesting. And that can help tell a story as well if you have some interesting objects going on. And so yeah, there's another simple lighting setup that you can use in a bunch of different types of renders. If you made it this far in the video, you might want to go and check out the Cyber Environments course. That's basically everything I wish I had when I was first starting out. So everything from full-length, step-by-step environment guides. There's 10 of them in there. It also comes with 5 asset packs of models that I use in my daily work, from people like the one in here, buildings, street props, industrial assets. There's 5 packs of those, plus a community of hundreds of environment artists who all use Blender and who are all sharing information, helping each other out. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in there which is really helpful and stuff I wish I had when I first started. So I'll leave a link below to that if you want to check that out. Other than that, thank you for watching this video. Hopefully you found it useful, and I'll see you in whatever's next.